Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Let's ring in the new year 5777, a year of health, happiness, and good luck for Marty Levinson.
Hey there, I am really Marty Levinson. Don't let anybody fool you. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the greatest cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host, Avi Myers.
Thank you, Marty. Avi Myers, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. Dial us up on the web at www.ntnm.org, communitypolicingcaps24.org. If you are seeing this on the web, you still have time to participate in Jewish Chicago. Once the show is on the air, you'll have to pick up. Jewish Chicago will be available. We're going to have 10,000 copies alone mailed out in the far northern suburbs. They will be delivered to houses and mailed in other parts of the city. It'll be available on newsstands. It'll be available on the web. We'll have a record circulation. And I'm so glad there's so many interesting judicial races in the 12th sub-circuit, which allows me to do this sort of thing. It's the area we want to build our circulation in the most. It is a pleasure to have our annual pre-election show. Ordinarily, we do this live in the studio at CAN TV on a Sunday morning, but they have not finished building the studio yet in the new building. So we're doing this in the studio, i.e. my dining room. And, and just for your point of reference, in case we goof up, it is the day after the vice presidential debate. And there's been one presidential debate to date, but there's other races we will be talking about, and there are other subjects too, in most likelihood. It is a pleasure to introduce you to election lawyer extraordinaire, James P. Nally. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Avi, and thanks as always for having me on.
First of all, thank you, and it's my pleasure, and I always get some intelligent conversation, and we take a look at the races, and hey, gang, we don't always agree, but that's the point. The point is to have an honest conversation about what's going on. We're not having a debate either. You know, we'll just try to run down as many races as we can, and there aren't that many contested races, unfortunately, and give you as honest a look as we can and try to inform you for when you got to go vote. So first, let's start. Early voting starts.
Yeah, we're actually in early voting right now as we speak, and that will go up to right before the election. And there was actually a very significant court ruling today that I'd just like to mention on the air. It's probably not fully resolved yet, but the Illinois legislature in 2014 passed a law that allowed the larger counties in the state of Illinois to have same-day voter registration. And what that means is that if you are not registered to vote, you could show up at your polling place on election day and present the evidence that you would need to register. You could register and then immediately be able to vote as well. So that's a big, big, big change in Illinois law.
Huge.
You remember the days where you had to be registered at least 30 days in advance.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you missed that deadline 30 days before the election, too bad. You weren't going to be able to vote no matter what you did.
Yeah, I'm actually not a fan of this, and I'll tell you why. It's like, it's one thing if you've just moved. I think there ought to be an exception for people like that, because people do, and there were exceptions in the past where people will be able to vote in the countywide or statewide or national or something.
Well, there's always
like
a federal ballot, yes, because because the federal offices are actually created under the United States Constitution. So there have always been slightly different rules if you wanted to vote for president or Congress or United States Senate, as opposed to local or statewide races.
Now, in my mind, and I know that everybody feels that every single election in Chicago is as honest as rain. And I've seen stuff. Oh, have I seen stuff? And I haven't seen anything. And I know that. Does this open up the doors for fraud?
No, I don't believe so. When you talk about I've seen, you're using the past tense, and I really think that that's what it is. The systems that were used and the procedures that were used in the past, there were ways to make fraud actually something easy to do. But the last 20 or 30 years, the technology, the procedures that are employed by the election authorities, fraud is not a major issue. You know, that's been the justification in many of these states where they've changed and really tightened up the rules, where a lot of the states, particularly more conservative states, are now requiring people to have photo IDs in order to be able to cast a ballot. And as you know, in the state of Illinois, you or I or anybody else, our signature is our identifier, and you come in and you apply for your ballot, and they give you an application. You sign it, and then the judges compare your signature to the signature in the record book, and as long as it matches up, you're good to go. So a lot of states have passed these voter identification laws, and in order for you to vote, you have to have an official type of an ID with a photograph on it, or you won't be allowed to vote.
Now shouldn't a citizen of this country really have that kind of thing? I mean, how unusual is it that people don't, and why wouldn't they?
You'd be surprised. There is a lot of feeling that what this is really, this isn't designed to avoid fraud or suppress the possibility of fraud. It's really designed to suppress the vote, and particularly the vote of poorer or older individuals who are not necessarily in the mainstream. You'd be surprised. There are a lot of elderly people who don't drive a car. They'd have no reason to have a driver's license.
But there are state ID cards. For instance, my
Yes.
mother, even when she was crippled, for whatever, I don't know if it was for hospital insurance or whatever it was, understood that a state ID was a good thing to have. So even though it was difficult on her, you know, I drove her over to the, well, at that time, the shortest line was to be found in Niles at that particular facility, even though I live in West Rogers Park. So we drove there. It was only a few minutes, and they took her picture, and she got the ID and went from there.
Your mom had the benefit of a wonderful son like you, who was willing to take her to get that. But there are people who are isolated enough that getting to a facility to get an ID can be a real hardship to them.
But you know what? That's one of the things that I like about the old days when you had all these precinct captains. I mean, they would literally pick you up and take you downtown and take care of you that way. They provided service.
Absolutely. You know, the era of the precinct captain, for whatever negative connotations there may be to that, the precinct captain was really the neighborhood ombudsman, and he or she would come to people's doors, and you know, and sometimes they get an earful. I'm not voting for any of your candidates because that street light has been burned out for 3 months, and you know what? It provided human contact. That's really what's missing now, because now, Avi, as you know, everything is done by mail, and we're all tired of going to the mailbox the month before the election. Or email. Well, email. Now it's starting to transition to that, but...
when I file a complaint with the city, I can do it via email.
Right. But in terms of the political mailers, that's still the way now, over the last, say, 20 years since the precinct captains have kind of atrophied away. That's the way that political candidates get their message out. So we've all gone to our mailbox the month before the election and found 10 mailers, you know, all saying candidate A is wonderful, another one saying candidate A is a crook, and candidate B is wonderful, and no, that one's a crook. It's gotten to that point because that's the only way that the candidates can have contact now. The other thing, of course, is the robocalls, which drive people crazy. Nobody wants to be sitting at dinner and having the phone ringing, and you pick it up and some recorded message saying, hey, I'm a great person, vote for me.
And by the way, it's interesting because, well, a couple things. One is that, you know, the guy who's the biggest purveyor of robocalls in my neck of the woods is Robert Creamer, who is Jan Schakowsky's husband. And as a matter of fact, they use it as a political tool.
Well, the thing is this. Back in the old days, somebody would knock on your door, and there'd be another human being on the other side of the door when you opened it, and they would have the literature for whatever candidates they were supporting, and they would hand that to you, and that would be your opportunity to engage them. You could talk to them about, well, what's her stand on this issue? Or, you know, I by the same time say, you know what, my garbage cans are all rusted out. I need new garbage cans. It was an opportunity to actually have human contact. And with the precinct captain going the way of the dinosaur, now the only contact that you're going to have with the politician is through your mailbox, on television, emails, as you're pointing out, are becoming, kind of the really cheap mass way to contact people, or robocalls. But there's no personal aspect to that. It's all canned.
One of the things I learned from Joe Barrios, who people like to knock, but you know what? He runs a tight ship. He gets the bills out on time. And sometimes I'm not very happy about that at all, because you're talking real estate tax. But he talks about why certain legislation should be enacted that allows them to do things a certain other way. When he told me what the cost was of a countywide mailing that he has to send out, it's prohibitive. We're talking six figures.
Oh, it's big money. But again, the candidates, that's why it's created the cycle where now when was the last time anybody knocked on your door for any candidate?
But as a matter of fact, I've got somebody who knocks on my door for a candidate who, just for the sake of being nice, let's say I really can't stand the candidate, and you know exactly who I'm talking about.
Well, and, I will say that's an exception. I would say that of the people who are viewing the program today, if 10% of them have somebody who actually knocks on their door and is there advocating for a particular candidate, that's unusual.
I think the candidate makes it a point to do that, to irritate me. And in the meantime, I will tell you that earlier this spring, I had 2 skunks living under my porch, a male and a female, and I named them after this husband-wife political team.
I hope they're still not there.
No, they're not there. John Cass wrote a very interesting column about skunks and what you can do to help get rid of them. And by the way, Repulsol, which I learned from you, apparently does keep skunks away.
Okay.
And by the way, that's basically coyote pellets. You know exactly what I mean. I know people that will not put it down there because they're putting down coyote urine.
It's all natural. It's a natural.
And it's pellets. It doesn't
biodegradable.
And melt. It doesn't smell. And it should be used. Speaking of human contact, one of the things I learned from by the way, there still are some precinct captain, and I want to point out a mutual friend of ours, Dennis Fleming, because Dennis Fleming still knocks on doors for Pat O'Connor, and he, with rare exceptions, because sometimes people really feel a certain way, he will still win the day, and he will take care of the people there. And you can almost be certain he's going to make a minimum of 100-vote difference in any precinct.
You know what? I think people miss that. I think people really appreciate if another person comes to their door and takes the time to knock on their door and talk to them in person. I think that the odds of the voter being swayed to vote for that candidate go up astronomically, because we are all so tired of the mass mailings and the robocalls and the email blasts and everything else. But that's the way business is done nowadays. And, getting back to the registration issue.
One thing real quick. If you want to avoid the robocalls, I have an internet phone. And nobody's got my number at all. Nobody. I don't get any political calls. And actually, I wish I could get them because I like to hear some. My neighbor, as a matter of fact, when they're on her machine, she'll call me over to hear them because she knows I want to hear them.
Well, I just want to touch on this same-day registration case very briefly, because I'm not sure how it will turn out by Election Day, but there was a lawsuit brought, and basically on an equal protection basis, that said, why do only people in large counties get to register on Election Day at the polling place and the smaller counties don't? Because the way the law was written, it's only counties over a certain size. So it's only a handful, Cook County obviously being the largest county in the state, and there's a few other larger counties that people can do same-day registration. But for instance, I would say probably every county south of Springfield, other than maybe St. Clair County, which is along the river by St. Louis and is fairly populated, they don't have the same day voter registration. But the reason being, the county clerks who administer the elections in these very small counties, when this bill was proposed, said, we don't want this. We don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the funds to carry out registration on the same day that we're also having judges there to make sure people can cast their ballots. So in the reason the law is written that way was by and large because the the election authorities in the smaller counties said, we don't want this. This is more work than we can handle, and we don't have the resources.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah. Because
no question. And you're talking about a much larger area.
You'd essentially have to have at least 1 or 2 judges in the polling place that day who would be dedicated to registering people.
Yeah. Now, I do want to talk about candidates, but at this point, I am going to break to talk about one subject that is near and dear to your heart, which is
Cubs playoffs.
Go Cubs. We have actually the 5th best run differential of all time of any club. And in advanced statistics, I was reading this on ESPN yesterday. Excuse me. We translate into something like the 4th or 5th best team in terms of applied wins based on our statistics. We won 103, but it said we should have won 114.
Well, I'm
happy with the 103.
I'm very, very excited. And you know what? I'm old enough to remember the 1969 collapse and, well, basically every other collapse over the last several decades. But
that hurt so much.
I will say, this team, if there's ever going to be a different team, if there's ever going to be a team that's just going to get the job done, I think it's this team, because this team is so young. I mean, the oldest, regular position player is like 26 years old.
Yeah.
Addison Russell's 22.
Oh, Fowler.
Yeah, Fowler's like 28. Yeah, but I mean, if you look at that core, man. Rizzo, Bryant, Addison Russell,
you're talking about 22
Javi
and 23-year-olds in some cases.
They're all in their early
Russell
to mid 20s.
22. He only hit 240, but 21 homers and 95 RBIs.
Yes, and just an absolute magnet in the field. No ball gets by that guy.
Yeah, and a clutch hitter. And by the way, let's not forget too, we're missing some guy named Kyle Schwarber, who might be back next year.
Right, who will be back, and we just got to find a place for him. That's all.
Well, for Babe Ruth, you find a place.
You know what? He can hit. He can hit. But the reason I'm optimistic is I think these guys are so young, and they're just enjoying playing the game with Joe Madden. And I think Black Cats and Goats, it's like the Civil War history to these guys. It's like they don't remember it. They weren't alive when any of it happened. It's often the mists of time. And all those things that maybe weighed on prior teams, or maybe they felt pressured by some of these, curses or Cubby occurrences, as Lou Piniella used to call them. I think these guys are just so young that it just rolls off their back. They don't pay any attention to it. And I think they're just going to go out and play the game. So
I never believe some guy who serves greasy hamburgers in a dive, goat is going to, his curse is going to have any effect.
Whatever it's been, obviously, whether it's a curse or whether it's just bad luck or, lack of performance or whatever,
as
it's been a long time.
The other side of town like to say commiserately to us, anybody can have a bad century. And I do, by the way, I do have a Cubs World Champion 1908 hat still that you gave me.
Well, I hope we'll both be able to wear it this year.
And by the way, it's sitting on right by that popcorn machine. So
I'm excited. We, obviously we're taping this before the Cubs have started the playoffs,
and we've learned our lesson about predicting things in advance.
Yes, I will just say I'm as optimistic as I will probably ever be this year.
Same here. And anyway, I want to touch on races. And you know what? I think I want to skip the president's race, if you don't mind.
I prefer that.
You know what? It's like, speaking of precinct captain, they taught me a long time ago that they said they don't push president race at all. People make up their own minds. Most people, you can't say anything about it. Now, I know for Jewish Chicago, I have to write my longest story about the president's race because people expect to read it. But I also know that the number of people I influence compared to other races is the fewest.
Absolutely. Yeah, this presidential race has gone on forever. It's just been the subject of every single night. Every cable program that you turn on is just people talking. And I'm more than happy not to talk about it.
I've gone through over 10,000 Q-tips so far this election. Now, as for U.S. Senate, you've got an interesting race. You've got Mark Kirk, who's a very moderate Republican, versus Tammy Duckworth, Congresswoman. Both are actually in wheelchairs, both former vets. And, of course, Kirk's been there about 12 years, if I'm not mistaken. He was in Congress prior.
Yes. This is his first term running for re-election, but he was in the Congress before that. So
how do you see that race?
It's a very interesting race. I was just reading an article on that today, and again, as we film this, we're basically a month out from Election Day.
Yeah, so things can change radically, and
right.
We know it.
And the thrust of the article was that both of them seem to have kind of stalled out around 40%. Kirk just a little bit under, and what the article mentioned was he hasn't seemed to burst past that 40% number, and Duckworth is slightly over. Most of the polls have her at maybe 43%, something like that. And the article basically said, look, these other people will be making up their minds in the next few weeks, and it's just a matter of how they break, because somebody will get to 51%.
Kirk to me is in some ways somebody I consider an ideal candidate. Even though I definitely do have an ideology, I'm not vain enough or selfish enough to think that my ideology is going to win the day. And I very much like the idea of people working together. And even though Kirk's got some stances that make me absolutely livid, the fact is he will work with the other side. He knows what he needs to do. I think this caused somebody to just take a walk. And he knows what he needs to do in order to win, within a blue state. And, I'd really like to see this guy win because he works with the other side.
Well, this is an election where I don't think anybody can tell you what it's going to be, but as in most elections, turnout determines the election.
Yeah.
And the whole presidential race has, kind of thrown that all up for grabs. I don't think there's anybody who can tell you turnout's going to be 20% higher than it normally is or 20% lower. There are certain people who can't stand one or both of the presidential candidates, and they may just stay home. And that means that even if they were more inclined to vote for Kirk or for Duckworth, they won't be casting a ballot because they're not going to, participate because they just feel turned off by the presidential race.
Yeah, I think I'm going to find out which way I vote when I get in the polling booth, to tell you the truth. Okay, let's move to Congress. There's two races basically in our coverage area. In particular, you've got the 9th, where incumbent Jan Schakowsky, who gets less and less votes each time, but still not approaching the stage where she's necessarily in danger, is running against Joe McCarthy-Lasson, who is a serious... Last time a non-serious candidate got 41% of the vote, which should be alarming to the Democrats, and they're aware of it. And Joe McCarthy-Lasson, she's a housewife. She's a very serious candidate. She spends every afternoon knocking on doors. She's meeting people. She's talking to people. She's making contact. And she's a responsible person. Another factor, too, is recent polls are showing that Illinois is now a light purple state in the presidential race, which really surprises me. It was always a solid blue state, but now it's light purple, meaning that Clinton's only 6 points ahead of Trump. And it's actually shrinking, and that surprised me.
I think the Senate race, congressional races, the presidential race is going to have a big determining factor on all the down-ballot races because of turnout. And it's just a matter of, are people going to be charged up about one or the other of the presidential candidates, say, I got to get out there and vote. You've got a lot of people, who are backing the Republican because they're just angry and feel like, I've got to get out there and I'm angry and I got to demonstrate my anger by voting for change. You've got a lot of people look at the other candidate, the Democratic candidate, and say, this is historic. This would be the first woman elected president of the United States. I got to make sure that I'm out there participating in history.
Yeah, that argument, I'm not crazy about it all. And the reason I'm not crazy about it is I think that even though I have no objection whatsoever with the woman being president, look at Golda Meir in Israel, look at Indira Gandhi in India, look at Margaret Thatcher, look at Angela Merkel. I mean, you've got some outstanding women running countries and doing a great job of it. May disagree with their ideology, but extraordinarily capable. You still want to see the best person for your country at the time. And it's not a question of picking the demographic. Get away from the demographics, people. Look at the quality of the individual or the lack thereof. And not just this race, any race, and make up your mind from there. My sister-in-law one time decided that she's going to vote for all the women because all the women are best. Well, at that time, there were very few women running as Democrats or Republicans, But LaRouche ran a slate of women. And she voted for a bunch of LaRouche candidates.
Well, obviously, you're very correct. You've got to know who the candidate is, what their stances are on different issues. This election, though, it's just very unpredictable because it may drive turnout really high because people are very motivated, either positively or negatively, about one or the other candidates, or turnout may be down because people look at the candidates and say, I'm not crazy about either one of these people, I'm just going to opt out.
I'd like to know how many broken TV screens there are right now.
So, and turnout is important. Why? Because all these down ballot races that we're talking about, from Congress to the U.S. Senate, even the local, judicial subcircuits, in part are affected by who turns out.
Yeah, now you've got Dole and Schneider in the 10th Congressional District, and they've each won, depending on the year, and that promises to be an extremely tight race. I mean, I happen to like Bob Dole a lot. I don't mind Brad Schneider. He's a very nice guy. Of course, with Jewish Chicago, I have to take Israel into account, and Dole's a clear winner there because Schneider believes in a two-state solution. And by the way, on the Israel count also, Kirk and John McCarthy-Lasson, despite the fact that Schakowsky's Jewish, she walked out on Netanyahu. So I'm not a fan of that. But I have no idea which way that race is going to go. None.
Well, as you said, each of these candidates has won before, and they've represented that district. So, it's almost like if you go back to ancient history, again, the Abner Mikva and Sam Young races up there.
And also John Porter.
And John Porter then later, right.
Yeah.
But, that was a seesaw district, and one person would win and be in for a term, and then the other person would win, and it went back and forth for, 10 or 15 years that way.
Yeah, and it still kind of is. You know what? First of all, before we get to other races, I want to mention the 12th Sub-Circuit, because that's the area of actually, that's the most contentious race in the whole damn ballot, as far as I'm concerned.
It's interesting, Avi, because as you know, as a general rule in Cook County, the Democratic primary picks our judges.
Yep.
Particularly countywide. I don't believe there are any judges running countywide who face a Republican opponent in Cook County in the general election. And we do have the sub-circuit system, and in most of the sub-circuits...
By the way, you're right. This is there's only two sub-circuits that have competition. One is the 13th, which is outside of our viewing range. But the 12th is actually, and we've only got 2 minutes here, so there's 4 races. And I've interviewed 7 of the 8 candidates, and actually, there's good things to say about 7 of the 8. One of them wants to stay on the QT, who I understand is actually a Democrat running as a Republican. The Republicans there was a highly qualified Democrat last time with a great record as a judge running against a Republican that 11 of the 12 or 10 of the 12 bar associations gave a thumbs down to, and the Republicans won. The Republicans in the area were so happy because it was a Republican, and I asked these people, are you aware of what their bar ratings were?
Well,
and they felt embarrassed.
That race that you mentioned was because 2 years ago there was again, turnout for the Republican voters in that sub-circuit was way up.
Yeah.
And people who came out to vote for upper ballot Republican candidates voted the down ballot candidates, and it went all the way down to the judicial sub-circuit races as well in that particular race. That was a sub-circuit that originally, when these sub-circuits were originally drawn almost 25 years ago, was drawn as a Republican sub-circuit, that as a general rule, the Republican candidate would have enough of a built-in voter base there that they would always win. Then probably in the last 10 years, it flipped where Democrats, and for a number of years, Democrats didn't even run in that district. And then it flipped in the last 10 years or so, where the Democrats began to win. And in at least the last couple of races, a lot of the Democratic candidates running in that sub-circuit didn't have a Republican opponent.
Yeah, we're really out of time here, folks. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. Avi Byers, Northtown News Magazine. Jim Nally, thank you. Election lawyer extraordinaire. Sonny, thank you so much.
Go Cubs.
Leaving out the Marty Levinsons, but check out Jewish Chicago. You'll see a great rundown. Bye-bye, everybody.